Cameron, you had another comment?
Yeah, so I'll just bring up one of the things I mentioned in the chat because I'm interested to hear your response. So you mentioned at the very beginning that you think there is some definition of money or essence of money that covers everything from, and then you listed the shekel of account all the way to modern dollars, and you listed a few other things.
Let
Do you-
me, I don't know. So maybe getting back to the discussion about vagueness,
Mm.
I don't know. I would not hold out hope that there's going to be a definition that captures all the things that we intuitively want to call money across
Even if it's a
history,
vague one,
and
yeah.
only those things.
Mhm.
I think that's why we this I think that's why books are good to write instead of just definitions, right? Like studying the
Mhm.
whole history of the thing and various definitions and comparing the definitions against one another is the right way to gain an understanding or a perspective on the kind of thing. I don't hold out any hope that we're going to be able to codify that in a definition that's short, it's got a handful of criteria. So, but I do think that there is a something there that vindicates our propensity to unify these things in thought and label them money. That there is something there that's worth exploring, at least in a paper, if not in a book. But okay,
Well, I might suggest that there are two things
okay,
instead of one thing.
okay,
Um, And you mentioned Hudson once in your
right,
introduction.
yeah,
Hudson has a bunch of stuff about ancient palace economies, and I think the
yep.
shekel in your example was this, like a unit of account, but no real circulating medium of exchange. But
That's what Hudson wants from that example. That's right.
right, I would also point to what a lot of medalists talk about as their history, which is that hunter-gatherers have no numeral systems, but they have systems of long distance trade with a medium of account, but no, or medium of exchange, but no
Right.
unit of account. And so I wonder if it's the confluence of those two things, which can exist and have historically existed independently, the confluence of those things is what constitutes what I would want to call a monetary economy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and you seem to be kind of getting at something like this with wrestling, like the unit of account seems to be like kind of a different kind of thing
Right.
than a medium of exchange.
Right. So yeah, my answer there is read chapter 2. At the end of chapter 2, I try to go in. Well, no, I do go into, when I say I try to go into, I go in. I'll say something about interdisciplinarity at the end of this, but like, I've been reading some of the literature on what we understand about the shekel, its origins, how it was defined, across different periods, how many of the physical shekels were in circulation, what they were used for, who was given them. And your hunch here, I think the historical record bears out, is exactly right. The media, the silver media that were weighed out against uniform standards, were given by the palaces to merchants to go off very far away and exchange those things for goods to bring back into Mesopotamia. So the use of the physical things is in trade as media, literally media of exchange. But the concept of the unit of account is also used internally in all the ways that Hudson pursues that allow for payment with equivalents that aren't actually those media. So I do think that the historical record bears out this idea that there's something about the shekel where these two ideas end up colliding, but the way in which they collide indicates a sensitivity to how easily that they could be pulled apart, and that pulling apart disappears maybe under the coin. I mean, maybe like there's something about the history of coinage that is itself really important for those two things beginning to collapse on top of one another and seeming like they're identical with one another. So yeah, I think your sense here mirrors my understanding of what the record shows. And I'll say, I mean, this is as good a time as any to say, like, um, Joe, Aaron, I hope you're happy. Boy, this has been a really good conversation, and it has been so great to have political theorists and economists here and to be doing genuinely interdisciplinary work from people from a variety of disciplines. I don't know how many of you all try to do this work where you get out of your own box and try to learn a little bit of economics and try to learn a little bit of political theory and history. man, it's hard to do on your own. So may this community continue to do this, where there's a lot of philosophers here, where those of us who are not philosophers can learn what philosophers have to bring to the table, but philosophers can listen to those who have extensive backgrounds that are beneficial for our own research.
I just had a follow-up. I mean, this is something I had a thought about just in reading the chapter, but it fits nicely that it could be that, I mean, a lot of the crux of a lot of dispute is about, as you're setting things up in a way that I think is good, is should you have about exchange, or including spotting chain exchange, should you think of the means of exchange as a medium that sort of circulates like an object, or is this a credit transaction? And how to understand that is like that's where a lot of slippage is, when the talking past each other, and confusion comes from different ideas about what has to go on there. And then one thing which you're already addressing is like when they talk about means of payment, it's like in the one characterization, Jevons, I think it talks about deferred means of payment.
Right.
Right. Instead of talking about means of payment on the spot,
Right.
which is also a way of settling a debt. Right. And so that's why there's slippage, because the idea is, well, if it's not a deferred means of payment, then it's just a means of exchange. But there's ways that this last exchange is teasing out a way to get at what's going on. Because so you think of the Economist's famous example, cigarettes circulating prisons as a commodity money.
Right.
So I think of that as a credit money, but the cigarette is functioning as a unit of account, there's a tangible display, but the one cigarette is the unit you're paying the cigarettes. That's the unit of sound is a cigarette, and a given cigarette could be a third of a cigarette, half a cigarette, a bent cigarette. It can just approximate the title, as it were, right? And it's a sort of symbol. It's a chart of the unit of account. But what they're paying is they're settling credits and debts for a towel or a magazine or whatever in these cigarette denominated credits and debts circulating in a cooperative. So that's a way you have something like a unit of account, the cigarette, a Marlboro style cigarette, functioning as, but it's also it's working as a means of payment, because it's working as a means of exchange, because it's a means of payment and settling debts. But now I think the way you're reading Ingham, he thinks that there's got to be, for a money to be a money, there's got to be something like that unit of account, at least implicit in the story.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. But
I mean, that is what Ingham signs up for. And I mean, he claims to get that from page 3 of Keynes's treatise. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to say Keynes, in talking about money account, that's there, but he's
Right.
ambiguous about whether it's the state or the community that has to recognize
right.
It's unclear in Keynes exactly. But I think that there's a question that's related to our earlier question about the boundary cases. I mean, couldn't you also just have circulating IOUs in a little credit cooperative, butcher, baker, brewer,
right.
circulating IOUs? There's no established medium of account. There's nothing equivalent to a cigarette denomination. There's just the brewer good for 1 beer, the baker good for 1 pound of meat, the baker good for 1 loaf of bread, and these IOUs are circulating amongst the cobbler as well, and but they're not ever sort of they're transferable debts, and they're circulating, but they're not ever sort of clarified in a sort of unified form of measure. They're not booked all over.
Yeah.
They're not. The way to move to a unit account would be to translate the value of the beer into the common unit,
right,
in comparison to the value of the bread, and then start booking everything from the go in those prices.
Yeah.
So that would be the move, as it were, from to put the circulating IOUs into a unit of account. Now, but you could argue that they've got a money, at least a proto money, before they establish unit of account. It clarifies things, but it's still a money already, because because the debts are circulating widely enough, or something like that.
Well, I would have thought that what would be required to have a money under but the Inghamian and the Keynesian conception, and one that's got some naive plausibility to it too, is well, it requires that there be this variety of circulating IOUs, but that there's like some rough concept of what the equivalence relations is between the IOUs themselves and so then the goods that they represent. And that makes me think of another example that is another field that we need to get folks involved in this community. Graver talks several times in the debt book about the TIV in Nigeria and how they manipulate debt within their communities always to make so they're like within a neighborly community. It's a gift giving society, but gifts are not real gifts. You're always meant to repay them, but you're never meant to repay them exactly, because if you repay them exactly, it indicates that you're done with that person. You have canceled all the debt. You don't want to go back. You always slightly overpay or underpay in order to keep yourself, one of the two parties, a little bit in debt, gives you a reason to going back, and it maintains sociality. Graeber wants to use that as an example for ways that communities use debt to build community. But, and Aaron, in your example, although the way that the debts are tracked and repaid is like in kind through goods, it's not through circulating IOUs. What's clear is that to the Bohannons, who were the anthropologists who studied this, was that there is something like a unit of account functioning in the minds of these folks so that they know roughly how in debt they are to one another. There's some kind of equivalence relation that they're maintaining to figure out how much payment is going back and forth. Now, is that a unit of account of the kind that Keynes is talking about? Probably not, right? You probably needs to have the uniformity of the shekel so that, you know, you can clearly specify and quantify amounts of debts and so forth. But it sure is unit of account like. So like, I like the way that you're thinking about that. This is, again, getting back to the boundary cases, and you know, I'm not inclined to call those gifts moving back and forth money, but if they were circulating IOUs, would it be more money like? I mean, that's at the boundary for sure.
Joe, you have to go, a hard deadline at 1:30, right? You're muted, I think.
Well, he's
Yeah,
definitely.
unfortunately, I do. I have kids who need to go to various places, so I'm
Oh,
about to hit
No need to explain yet.
But
But
before I go, I really do want to thank people for showing up, and this is exactly the kind of conversations we were hoping to provide a platform for. So thanks to all of you for doing the thing we were hoping you would do. So
why don't we make this a hard, like, not a hard end, but an end, a place where people can end, but I don't have a time constraint right now, so I can hang on a little while if people want to chat. I'll follow up with Graham on a point too, but this would be just a place to close. But if you want to stay on and chat, or Graham, you want to look at the comments.
Yeah, I'll stick on for a little bit. I'm needing coffee is what I'm needing. So I'm running out of steam here, but I'll stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes or so for anybody who wants to stick around. I did see somebody, like my eyes caught, somebody asked me whether the book is under contract. No, if anyone's got advice about that, I would happily take it. I've been told that having as much of a completed manuscript before soliciting a contract is a good idea. So I've been spending time just trying to get it in order. But I would, if you all got ideas about good landing spots for the book, I would greatly appreciate it.
So I'll stay on, but let's just make this an official close of business right now.
Yeah, and I will again thank everybody.
commented.
It was absolutely fantastic.
And I'd also like to say that this is really what we hope for. So it's really great. Cool. So yeah, feel free to stay on or go as you please.
Can I say something about realization?
Yeah,
if we
please.
have the time.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it is very important. A comment that maybe lead to some comments from Graham. It's interesting that in ancient Greece, both Aristotle and Plato, in the Republic and in politics, reversely, they seem to, and we find also in the tragic, in Sophocles, Antigone, and this kind of stuff, there is a suspicion about money because they seem to view it as a cause of disintegrating community relations. Okay, that's okay. But what is interesting in both Aristotle and Plato is the following textual fact. They seem to think that it is necessary for the Greek polis, which exhibits a kind of monetization, you know that, we know that, huh? Striking coins and all this kind of stuff, that we need to have something like money in order to measure things and to exchange things. Okay, that's good. I mean, Plato in Laws says explicitly that money is a good thing, but money as a measure and medium of exchange. Now, when money transforms itself in realizing something, let's say value, for example, then both Plato and Aristotle begin to have a negative attitude towards money. And to give an example about realization, which I think is very, very important thing, and you developed it in the chapter. Let us make an experiment. A counterfeit coin can circulate things, no problem. But when Graham, for example, or Thomas cuts the circuit of exchanges and wants to hold on to this counterfeit coin must be real coin. I mean, something must be realized in it. So it seems, okay, so it seems that ancient Greek thought seems to acknowledge something. I don't know how aware was of this transformation of ideal money, let us say, or symbolic money and real money, realized real money. I refer to real money. Something is realized in it, some value, something.
Right.
It seems curious and paradox that there is this differentiated attitude towards different functions of money. That's a thing that I'm working. So
yeah, so I don't have much to say. Well, here's the, I mean, that's a lie. I do have much to say about it. One thing I have to say is if you haven't read Stefan Eich's book, oh man, I'm tired. It's either The Politics of Currency or The Currency of Politics. I think it's The Politics of Currency. Came out a couple years ago. His Aristotle chapter is really good, and it's in part on this about the differing attitudes that Aristotle has, or maybe Aristotle himself doesn't have, but displays towards money in the ethics as opposed to the discussion in the politics. In the politics, you get the discussion where, and he uses the term nomisma. I see Zoli looking at me. I'll correct my pronunciation if it's wrong. In order to like praise the civic function of the symbolic law-like ways in which money exists and can hold community together, right? Zoli, your whole chapter for Joe's book is on that, the 5-5 in ethics, right? And what he means by that balancing function, right?
I talk about those chapters in Politics 1 as well, but yeah.
Okay. So anyway, Stefan's reading of the politics is that Tomas gets back to the other side you were talking about, the dirty aspect of money, right? The way that money can grow itself like a cancer, and people get all misguided when they think that it's an end of itself as opposed to a mere means. So you get these two different attitudes in Aristotle, and like what I think resonates with me about that fact, and then Stefan's particular way of reading those two things against one another in his chapter, is that maybe the thing to say about Aristotle, and I don't know, I would love the reference to the passages in the laws to maybe say the same thing about Plato, but in Aristotle it's like, monetary reality has just descended on to Greece, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're being pulled in different directions and don't have a sufficient degree of self-awareness of the two different ways in which it's pulling to be able to have, well, certainly not to have a consistent theory, but even to like sense the tension, like it might take a while in theorizing to be able to detect the tension. To the point about realization, I mean, I take it that the passage in the Ethics indicates that Aristotle he himself realizes that realizations of money are something other than merely a medium of exchange, so that the concept of counterfeit money is possible. It's not obvious that the concept of counterfeit money makes sense in the discussion from the politics. Maybe it does, but it's not immediately obvious to me. But it would definitely be the case in the discussion in the ethics, I think, that you've got the conceptual resources to be able to define counterfeitedness as such. And then that requires this nothingness that I started off talking about being a real thing that somehow is like present in this chunk of metal, but not present in this chunk of metal.
Charles has a hand up.
Yeah, I'll be brief, because I can just bother Graham anytime I want.
He's right down the hall for me.
Yeah. But the more I listen to this, the more I think that the development of the state and different types of state capacities, and different types of governance, like clientelism versus capitalist societies, have a really strong relationship to what you're talking about. And so I'll probably bother you with that later.
Good. Yeah. And I would benefit from hearing more about contrast classes to capitalism. This goes back to Tomas's point earlier about where is Marx going to be in the book, and Marx needs to feature in the book. But in order to say what is distinctive about capitalist money, it is useful to have a contrast class. So that'll be helpful.
I had a follow up myself for earlier in connection with.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like final settlement is a key, one of these key notions that sort of divides different thinking about money, where the conventional orthodox story is like the means of exchange does is it can do among strangers who don't have to have any further business, right? There's a debt there, it settles it. I mean, they don't talk about debts in that context, but that's just, I think it's one thing that's animating the idea that, the swap is done. The swap happens, it's finished. There's no outstanding debt that then has to be paid later, right? And then the thing that then, from that point of view, it can look like the idea of a unit of account and a means of deferred payment. That's all, doesn't involve final settlement, right? But I think that's a confusion on this, and that goes back to Aristotle. Well, one reading and maybe what Aristotle does is think about money as involving, not within communities, but in the first instance, but among foreigners, and then foreigners who don't have ongoing relations and they need to settle up with each other in transactions, but then within the community they have outstanding. So like that picture, the final settlement, I don't know, that seems like it should be a function, like or something. The debts are finally settled. There's something that can do that. And then that intuition, I think, is driving a lot. And a lot of what in the Orthodox picture, a lot of what they don't appreciate about why credit can be money, is they don't see why it can achieve final settlement. And that's because among two parties, so like if I owe you something, right, and I pay you in Joe's debt to me, right, then now Joe owes you something.
Right.
So that's outstanding, but I'm swapped out of the picture. So my debt to you is settled. So final settlement is achieved there. Mm-hmm. And that can work within a credit money, two parties can settle up final settlement. And it can happen also when among strangers, travel, foreign traders or whatever. It can happen in that side by using a credit money in the same way, right? As long as they have enough trust and of some kind of redeemability, of the foreign coin or the foreign good or whatever that's recognized as money. Reputation, yeah, that would be good. So that to me is like I keep coming back to that as like the confusion about when final settlement can be achieved or not achieved. It really seems to run through the whole tradition of thought and kind of creates all kinds of confusion for not appreciating. So I don't know if that's something you really would want to get into, but since it's part of your project, which is to sort of get everybody talking to each other and then sort out a conception of money that squares up to the real loci of debate, then maybe that's something worth bringing in.
Yeah.
It did come up in discussion in the context of the credit money people who don't finally settle up because they want to preserve their trust relations. That's an interesting point, that Graeber point, but it might feed the idea that credit monies can't accomplish final settlement, and when instead that his point is just that they don't have to.
Yeah. Another context in which this has come up for me that I don't have I haven't concluded what I want to think about it, but I think it's like there's two different ways in which the debt theory, claim theory tradition tell their story about how the credits get generated that then circulate as money tokens or realizations of money. One is the Butcher Baker Brewer story that Mitchell Ennis gives, where the credit that circulates, as you were putting it, like if you pay me off with some IOU that Joe has to you, like what I hold in my hand, like its ultimate value resides in me giving it to Joe and then me getting something from Joe. That's what's going to finally settle that IOU circulating. And that's always struck me as different than what's going on in the classic Nappian chartalist case, where the credits, or in at least in the cartoonish version that modern monetary theorists have for it, which doesn't, you read Dasson and you realize that history isn't exactly like that, but we're just going to stick a lot of credits out there. And the way that we're going to give them value is that people are going to be able to discharge their debt to the state by being able to pay them back. If I had an IOU, if Joe and I had an IOU and Joe gave me the IOU and I gave it back to him, there's a way in which, and that was it. You weren't involved there and no one else was involved. If I give the IOU back to Joe for the original thing that he lent me, and that's just a two-party transaction, I feel like it seems weird to say that I paid Joe the IOU in order to get whatever it was that was owed to me. Like I redeemed it or something like that, but it doesn't seem like when it's just two parties that whatever a payment is, and again, I don't know how to specify it exactly, it doesn't seem like payment, but when you pay your taxes, you pay your taxes. Like I don't think we're strained towards saying that is a payment. I mention all that by way of saying that I think it's connected up with what counts as settlement, what kinds of things are settlement. Do I settle, when I settle with Joe, my IOU, is it the same thing with me settling with the government with my tax payment? I mean, I don't know if I have intuitions on this matter, but like, at least in the case of thinking about applying the verb to pay with the two different things, it feels to me like there's two different things going on there. And I wonder if it hooks up with some of your thoughts here about what matters about final settlement and how commodity theorists can't really get their head around the idea of money as a means of final settlement in the way that the credit theory does. That might have all been a tangent, but like I feel like it's in the vicinity of the kind of thing that you're trying to help me.
No, it helps. I think the common feature is, as you might put it, buying power or purchasing power, where to purchase is to have the power is to have a capacity. It's not necessarily to exercise it, and the purchase is settlement of a debt. So it's the power to settle a debt. Against the state, I need that. I have that power because the state will recognize this money and settlement of the debts. But if in the cooperative community, I have this IOU and I can get beer or bread or whatever, like because it's recognized by the cooperative. But that's that buying power. So it's not just the bread that I wind up with; it's the power to be able to get bread. It's the power to get beer. I'm richer because of having the money, not just the set of goods that I would command if I kept the money. And that's the same thing. The good of freedom I get from paying my taxes. But before I've paid my debts, to the state, I still, in having the money, I have the power. So I'm richer. It's good to be rich, richer, good to have money in this way, because you get power out of it. You get buying power.
Yeah.
And I think that works in both directions. Help believe it. But
So,
in both cases, settlement. In the bilateral case, there's always an option that the state won't do. The is waiver of the debt, right? Is another way the debt can be settled. It's just, it's waived because the person just says, don't worry about it, like,
Right.
so that's, yeah, I mean, that's another, or it's, yeah, anyway.
So, Joe has left us on our own, and I know how conversations with Aaron can go on, so I'm going to to declare the session over with the power vested in me by being the host of this this thing and working with Aaron and Joe on this group. Thanks to Aaron and Joe for putting it together. One more time, thanks to everybody for being here. And please come to the next one whenever it is. Aaron, any closing words?
No, just that I agree with everything said, but also to you, Graham, do you want to look back at all the comments, which you may not have had time to read?
I will. Anyone who I should be, anyone who has written a comment, I don't want to do it now. No, anybody who sent me a comment, if they want to write a follow-up question, that's fine. I'm going to save all the comments, so I'm not going to delete it before saving it. And then
I can also leave it open. I can leave it open for a while.
Okay. Well, there is a function that allows me to save it, so I'll save it, and maybe I will try to reach out to folks who asked.
Oh, we also have the video as well, so you can look at it.
Exactly. There should be enough information there to triangulate and be able to get back with people with questions that they had. So I'm going to hit the save chat function now. It has been saved.
Oh, perfect.
And that will be that. Okay, everybody. Thanks again. And we're going to stop recording.